live Q&A on Facebook and on YouTube. Welcome all of our viewers, and it's good to be back. I'm Bruce McClary with the NFCC, and I'm here today with NFCC President and CEO Rebecca Steele, who hasn't been with us for a little while. Hey, Rebecca.
Hello. Good afternoon.
It's good to see you. And if for those who are wondering, my background is a little bit different because I'm back in the office today. So this is my first time back in the office in what seems like a million years. And Rebecca, it's right down the hall. So
socially distanced.
As we should be, safely socially distancing. But thanks to the miracle of the interweb, we're able to come together on the same screen from different sides of the hall. And we got a lot of good, really important topics to talk about later. But since it's been a while, Rebecca, what have you been up to since you were last on? And doing anything interesting over the summer?
Oh, I think the last time we were on, I was at home working. And I, too, just have come back into the office. So, you know, like everybody, really struggling to sort of find a normal during this COVID-19 time. Really struggling to find things to do in Washington, D.C., which is where I am. It's been a little hot here as it is in the summer. But, you know, more than that, we've been hard at work really understanding the impacts on households and individuals and families and communities due to the COVID, and really working to find solutions in a lot of different respects to help people through this difficult time.
Yeah, and there's been a lot to keep us busy, especially over the past several weeks since the last time we talked to you. A lot going on in several key areas. So we'll talk about what's in the headlines, and we'll talk about the important issues that are getting a lot of attention right now. And I think what our intent is today is to talk about some of the ways that we're paying attention to these issues, and some of the solutions that are available, and some of the ways that people can get help from NFCC member agencies. So we'll definitely talk about that as a part of this. So it's not just that we're talking about the problem, but we're also talking about solutions as well. But it's important to recognize the scope of these problems, because this is really some serious stuff. And, you know, we're seeing it in all kinds of areas. But what I'd like to start with first is to talk about housing, and talk about what we've been seeing in the headlines with housing, what homeowners are facing, what struggling homeowners are facing, and what options might be available for them. So, Rebecca, what are your thoughts right now just about the situation for homeowners and what they're going through?
Yeah, well, that's obviously one of our biggest concerns and one of the biggest problems that we've been working to find solutions on. You know, they're homeowners, renters, really making sure people can stay in their home during a pandemic where you have to isolate, you have to have a home to go to. You know, one of our biggest concerns was the risk of homelessness and the amount of unemployment, you know, up to 40 million people being unemployed. And how do you make sure that you understand that they are stable from a housing perspective, from a food perspective, et cetera? But it's been really difficult, but we have had some glimmer of hope around, you know, up until today with the unemployment stimulus checks, with mortgage forbearance availability, which is really just a deferred payment. And for the housing folks, it's really important to note that there was a large amount of distressed borrowers that were able to sign up for forbearance and defer their payments. The signups were originally roughly 9% of all homeowners in the U.S. who signed up for forbearance. And that was an initial 90 days. You can extend that up to a whole year. So many are continuing to extend to make sure that they can stay safe in their homes.
So those who already signed up, nobody yet is at risk of having this term out where they can't find extended relief. They can continue if they're on a forbearance program, they can expect that they can continue to get that benefit if they need it for up to a year, correct?
Yes, and they should. I mean, it's really, really important to understand that you need to call and sign back up every 90 days typically. You want to make sure that you're checking in with your mortgage lender or servicer to make sure that you get that extension. Servicers have different processes, and it's important to make sure that you are safe in that process. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to call in advance of each 90-day term of that deferred payment, making sure that you're checking back in with that servicing group. So.
And I guess the key here is to be proactive in your communication. Don't wait for them to contact you. You, the homeowner, need to be reaching out and talking.
Yeah. And the numbers are interesting because, we started out with about 9% of all household mortgage holders signing up for forbearance. There's about 1 million people out of that 9% that continued to pay their mortgage. So that you can see some of the help that up until now was available through the unemployment, $600 a week adder plus their state unemployment. So we see the impact of people wanting to pay and doing so. But there's also the opposite of that, Bruce, which was there was almost 1 million homeowners who went delinquent. They didn't call for forbearance, and now they're behind on their mortgage. So that really puts, 1 million people at risk of losing their home. So, making sure that people know to make those calls and to sign up for those deferred payments is incredibly important.
Yeah, and one of the things too that I think is certainly worthy of mentioning here. You talked about the, I believe you said it was what 7.5% in forbearance right now, but a sizable portion of those households are Black and Hispanic, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Both Black and Hispanic homeowners have double the rates of distress, both in home ownership, but also even more so in the renter space, which we're going to talk about. But yeah.
And it's interesting. It stands out a lot because home ownership levels in the United States among those populations are at record lows right now. There are fewer homeowners who are especially Black homeowners right now than there are other homeowners. And that's lowest it's been since fair housing laws were enacted in 1968. So it's interesting there to see that that the percentage is so high in terms of those who are already distressed and are utilizing these forbearance programs.
Right. Well, in the Harvard Joint Studies, which I read diligently every month, they found that the Black and Hispanic households are much more likely to not only have been hurt by the economic impacts, more than half of Hispanics, like 58%, and 53% of Blacks households experienced a decline in employment since mid-March. So much higher than other white and Asian households. So,
right, and even harder hit in terms of the direct impact of the COVID-19 virus itself. So you've got higher unemployment, you've got struggling homeowners. Are there? I guess one of the questions on my mind about the homeowners: do you think that there are any? Do you think that there are homeowners specifically who are at risk of falling through the cracks? In other words, these forbearance programs and other mechanisms that are available to keep people afloat. Is there anybody at risk of not being reached by these programs, or maybe not being able to plug into something that can help them right now?
Well, I think there's always that risk, which is why, as the homeowner and as it's important for you to be proactive. If you're not sure where to call, calling a nonprofit credit counselor or some other community organizer or social organization in your community, it's important to get in contact. So people are there to help you do that. So, my concern is like the 1 million homeowners who didn't sign up for forbearance, who could have, and why that was the case. So we're exploring why that was the case in those circumstances. But no one should be without a forbearance plan today that has been impacted by COVID, employment, loss of job, loss of income, or otherwise.
Yeah.
It is a benefit that is written into law by the CARES Act, and it's important to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and it's especially important for people who may have fallen behind already without plugging into a forbearance program. It's especially important that those households reach out to a nonprofit housing counseling agency like the agencies at nfcc.org who are HUD approved, and have that discussion and start talking about the options that are available, because the farther behind you go, even though there may be programs you can plug into, some options may fall off the table depending on how far behind you are. And that's why it's important to talk to a housing counselor to help sort out what you can and can't do.
Right. And these housing counselors are there, they're trained, they know the forbearance programs, they communicate with servicers every day, they understand the rules, and they're really there to help you. No fear. Pick up the phone, go online. There's lots of ways to connect with them, and make sure that, a tragic event like you going delinquent or further delinquent doesn't happen. It's not necessary, which is different than renters, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But as a homeowner, you have that right in the United States today to defer your payment for up to 1 year, and everyone should take advantage of that needs it.
And talking to housing counselors too can also be helpful if you're making any decision about your mortgage and how to manage your mortgage debt. A lot of homeowners who are in a decent position financially and are staying afloat, they're thinking about things like cash out refinancing. Seniors are thinking about reverse mortgages. So it's always good to talk to somebody who can be your financial advocate and provide objective advice when you're making a decision like that, because like they always say, the what you owe on your home is probably the single biggest debt you'll ever owe in your life. So you want to make the right kind of decisions. It's always good to get a professional opinion and get some guidance when you're making those decisions.
That's right. I'll just add one other thing, Bruce, because I think it's important. People are already starting to worry about what's next. So I've got a forbearance plan. I've been on my forbearance plan now for 6 months. I have another 6 months, but I'm really worried about sort of the recovery of the economy and finding a job or two, depending on what you need to make ends meet. But what's next is really important too. So taking advantage of the deferred payments now, which by the way, you'll pay that back over time. It won't be a lump sum, and that's also an important point. But what's next if I get to the end of my forbearance time, which is 1 year, and I still can't pay, or I can't pay the whole amount? I mean, right now, people are working hard at finding solutions. How do I modify the mortgages to make sure that people can afford it and over time make those payments? Or what other alternatives are there? So I know people are hard at work, and we are working with them to find those types of solutions to get out in front of this, so we're not waiting to, like the last housing crisis, where it was very, very difficult. People had to wait. There was a bad process. People weren't sure whether they were going to be able to stay in their homes. Now, getting out and communicating early on this, on what alternatives will be, is an important point of this communication that we need to be doing.
Yeah, especially important if you're a homeowner and you're confused about what the next steps are or what's in store for you. It's always good to good to reach out. But speaking of people who are facing very difficult times, and there's a lot of confusion about the options they have, renters are, in a really tough bind right now. 30 to 40 million Americans are at risk of eviction right now, and the landscape of eviction protection is it's all over the place. I mean, it's so confusing, and I just feel bad for all the people who are searching for answers, and the answers in some areas are not clear. So let's talk a minute about renters and the situation they're in, and also landlords who rely on rental income, mom and pop landlords who are running their rental housing as a business. And that's their sole income. They're hurting too. So what are your thoughts right now about the rental crisis that we're facing?
Well, I mean, if there's one area that I'm most concerned about, it is this particular area. I think mass evictions would be tragic across the U.S., not only for those families, individuals, communities, but for our economy too. So there's just evictions are quickly expiring. And that is really problematic. Not only are evictions quickly expiring, I mean, we have 110 million renters in the US today.
Yeah.
Over 20 million of them are at risk of losing their rental unit. So their home. And think about this, today, a fraction of that, a very small fraction are homeless, and how much stress that puts on individuals, families, children who are homeless. It would just be absolutely tragic. And right now, by the numbers, unemployment and loss of income are significantly higher for renter populations, and significantly higher in that for Hispanic and Black renter families. So we've got the same problem, just exacerbated by complexity, no clear-cut standard solution, and quickly expiring evictions.
Yeah, and if you look at if you think about how precarious the position is right now for renters, and you also look at the difference between asset accumulation with renters versus homeowners. Homeowners have the advantage, especially if they built a lot of equity in their property. It's almost like they have a safety net there, a financial cushion. And so many renters don't have that same kind of financial cushion. So there's really no safety net. And that's why you talked about homelessness. I mean, that's a serious concern right now for the millions of renters who are facing possible eviction. And what happens? Those who don't have family to go to, those who don't have friends that can help them through with temporary housing during the difficult time. And the income issue is the other thing. You mentioned incomes and the disruption of unemployment. Even before we went into the crisis, about 47% of renters were using too much of their income for their rent payment. So the rent was gobbling up a big chunk of their income. In fact, this portion of half of all renters was using 30% or more of their income for their rent payment, which is ill-advised. Doesn't leave you much room for savings or other expenses. So knowing how far behind many households are, knowing that they're going to be held accountable for the rent payment they've missed in some way, shape, or form, it's hard to see that there's any light at the end of the tunnel. So what can these people do right now is the big question. What can they do?
Well, I mean, for sure, extension of eviction policies is really important, but you can only do that for so long. These landlords and property managers are hurting too. The emergency rental assistance, both federal and state and local, has come in very handy and is needed much, much more. There was a $100 billion stimulus request in the most recent HEROES bill that was not passed. The $100 billion starts to solve the problem. That's how big this rental problem is. But reducing other debt. So some of the things that we've been working with renters at the NFCC agencies are understanding when there's no savings, how do you really pay your rent, reduce your debt, get on a budget, understand social services in your area, and potentially even legal aid. So we have built a more comprehensive rental counseling process, but it's just not enough. We believe that more emergency rental assistance is needed at both the federal and state level. And we also are pulling together some programs where people can get help with their other debt as well. So some new rent relief counseling programs where we can reduce the payments for their credit cards, which I know are growing out of need, and other things, that medical debt, student loan debt, I know we're going to talk a little bit about today, but also very problematic. All the renters that we've seen so far have very little to no savings, to your point, and no retirement.
Yeah.
So it is really an exasperated sort of situation for renters at the moment.
Yeah, and for many of them, just to fill the gap that was created by the elimination of the $600 per week additional unemployment benefit, you're seeing a lot of these individuals turn towards whatever available lines of credit they have to get by. I mean, you're talking about households that have to cut about $2,600 on a monthly basis out of their budget. I mean, that's a hard task for anybody, but for people who are struggling with unemployment, who are just living day to day, it's almost an impossible ask. So it's not surprising that families that have available lines of credit in those circumstances are going to start turning to those, and they're going to max them out. And at some point, those lines of credit are going to be at risk of falling behind and further past due. But that is a big issue. But yeah, so going back to the renters again, a lot of renters owe student loan debt. You look at people who are right out of college, they're not as likely to be homeowners right out of college. They're going to be renting, and they're going to be paying thousands and thousands of dollars of student loan debt they're going to be repaying. And for them, if you're borrowing federally insured student loans, you at least can rest easy knowing that you have an extension of the payment deferment, and that your payments are deferred and your interest is not accruing at least until December 31st. So that's a great opportunity, because that's a huge burden that's now lifted off the shoulders of so many struggling student borrowers. And they can then turn their attention and their resources towards some of the financial challenges that are not as easy to address. So it does give student borrowers a little bit of time, but I think the main thing for student borrowers here is to use this as an opportunity. If you're struggling and you don't have any income, obviously take full advantage of the deferment program. You don't have to make payments. Payments are being recorded on your credit bureau as being paid on time, which can give you a little bit of a boost in your credit score. That can have a residual impact, a positive impact as well in other areas. Can help you restructure your debt more affordably. But you also have time to look at your affordable repayment options if you know that you're going to be continuing to struggle in the years ahead, and that your student loan debt was not structured in a way that was manageable before COVID-19. Look at the options. Talk to a student loan counselor. You can reach out to nfcc.org and talk to a counselor who can help guide you through the decisions that get you to a point where you're plugged into a program that's best for you. There's so many different outcomes with these programs. You want to make sure you're in the right one. So that's why it's important there. So I think there are all kinds of options. If you have private student loans, you're certainly not benefiting from the same deferment plan as the federally insured student loan borrowers, but there are options, and you should reach out to your student loan servicer to talk about what's possible with your private student loans, that you may be able to benefit from even a temporary deferment or forbearance program, or even restructure the debt more affordably. But I think probably some of the best news right now is related to the benefits that student borrowers are getting, and the fact they don't have to make payments on federal student loan debt until after the 31st of December.
And does that mean that if they can pay student loans, I mean, what's the advantage of paying ahead? Is there an advantage of that?
Yeah, that's a good point, because if you're in a position to pay, you can still make the payments on your federally insured student loans, and you can get ahead of it, because you can get ahead of your debt repayment because of the fact that your loans are not accruing interest right now during this period, and you can make substantial progress. So if you are fortunate enough to be gainfully employed, making a full income, if you're benefiting like so many in that situation right now by not spending on vacations and other things, you may be flush with a lot of savings here that you can then apply to your student loan debt and pay that down aggressively. I would caution here, though, that if you do have a lot of high interest credit card debt or other debt that's in front of you, you may want to do a little bit of prioritization and tackle some of that first, because that's costing you the most right now. And if you clear that off, but you can certainly prioritize and think about how much progress you can make during this period with your student loan debt. That's a good point.
I think that I'll just add to that many credit card, many personal loan or installment loans have deferment periods today.
Mm-hmm.
So if you haven't taken advantage of that, it's well worth exploring. Like, can you defer those payments that are high interest rate payments? You may still get some small amount of interest, but it won't be clocking at 30 or 35%. It'll be
right.
less than that. But if you're really struggling for that cash flow, that's how credit counselors in these nonprofit agencies with the NFCC, they really focus on rent payments, housing payments, credit card payments, student loan payments, and even medical debt and others, small business owners. So, no matter what your circumstances, it really is a plan for you as an individual. It's important to really know your situation, not make assumptions around it, and really build a plan to help you through this period. I think it's a real advantage of reaching out and getting help.
And we've just got a couple of minutes left. I know we got one more topic to cover. We're talking about the gap that's left in so many budgets right now because of the fact that stimulus checks, there hasn't been another round of stimulus funding, stimulus checks, and there's the unemployment benefit, the weekly $600 unemployment benefit has evaporated, leaving so many people in a critical state right now with their finances. So in terms of that, what should people be doing if they're feeling the pinch because of that?
Well, I think one thing is for sure need to make sure that you are signed up for any unemployment benefit or other relief programs that are in your state or local area. It may not help make ends meet, but it may help some. So it's really important that you're signed up for all the benefits that you can have and are available to you. Then, Bruce, I would say that the second thing is don't be afraid to reach out for help. Many consumers across the U.S. have 6, 7, 8, 10 credit cards, other loans, rental obligations, maybe even medical debt or student loan debt, to your point. And working through all that is very stressful and very difficult and very complex. So reaching out for help to organize that for you, is what we do every day. That's what we specialize in, and that is our mission. Other than that, I would say that be careful if you do have retirement savings, and we've talked about this before on in other ways, but be careful rating your 401k or taking loans out against your 401k, because at some point that rebuilding is going to have to happen, and it's really critical and important. Savings are important. Right now, savings are really difficult, but as we recover and as individuals recover, putting a little bit away for savings and retirement are really critical.
Yeah, and I'd follow up on that earlier point you said about don't be afraid to reach out for help. A lot of people are in situations right now where they're having to reach out for assistance that they've never had to ask for before. So it can be confusing in those situations. And I think one benefit for reaching out and talking to a nonprofit credit counseling agency is that if you're having difficulty putting all the pieces together and figuring out where to go for help beyond just the assistance putting together a workable budget or dealing with the debt that you have, the housing situation, they can often connect you with community resources, food banks, utility assistance, and other ways that you can receive help and point you in the right direction and get you on started working out those arrangements. Because it's very important when you're not having the income coming in steady to try to get as many breaks as you possibly can. And if there's a way that you don't have to pay your utilities, but you can keep your lights on, try to plug into that. If there's a way for you to get food assistance so you don't have to have a high grocery bill because you don't have the money to pay for food, try to get that as well. And take advantage of all the resources that you can. But NFCC is here to help. Certainly a good resource for people to connect with. nfcc.org is the website. People can log on. They can connect with a counseling agency, and they can get that conversation started. Counseling, talking to a counselor, you can plug in, talk to a counselor for free. Again, it's a great resource. I strongly recommend people look into that, whether it's a housing issue, whether it's an issue with credit card debt, student loans, mortgage, rent. Just plug into that resource and take full advantage of it. It is available and it's there to help. So, Rebecca, any parting thoughts before we wrap up here? We're right at time.
Well, I was just going to say we're going to continue to work toward understanding what this recovery is looking like, understanding how to get more solutions for individuals that are hurting during this period. Staying in your home is really important, paying your rent, and obviously reducing your debts so you can have an affordable payments is really critical. So we'll keep working on it.
And yes, we will. Absolutely. There's a lot of work to be done. And thank you, Rebecca, for being on today and talking about these topics. We'll have you back again much sooner.
Thanks, Bruce.
Take care, everybody. Thanks for watching.